Good morning, everyone. Morning.
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 Morning, Jeremy.
How's your
Hi, Skura.
How's
Rodney
everyone?
Harber too?
God.
Well done.
Good.
Oh,
Morning.
Wally Peters too. Yo.
Yeah. Morning, Rodney.
Morning.
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 Morning, Carl.
Morning, how are you?
How's it?
Morning.
Aka.
Looking like a celebrity.
Morning,
Me?
everybody.
Morning, everybody.
Morning, Barry.
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Yeah, hi, everybody.
Good afternoon from Australia.
Hello.
Morning, everyone. So we'll just go straight through to it. Today we have Rodney Harber. Before I start, just like a special mention to everyone joining us from outside of the region. General Saita from Vienna. I don't know if I'm missing somebody else who's here from outside of our region and maybe the country. We're all local.
Hallo, spricht Gerald, Grüße an alle.
Hello.
Hello, Gerald. How's it?
So we've been working on this. We've been working on this with Rodney for a while now, but I think it's coming at the right time when we are almost closing off the year. So Rodney is just going to share with us his experiences and his work. So it's really great to have him here. So Rodney went to Maritzburg College and he graduated from the University of Natal back then, 1965. He's authored many books. He's been a lecturer, he's a town planner, urban designer, architect. The things that stand out with Rodney, he's been maybe the longest serving president of this institute. 2.5, Rodney?
Half Rodneys.
Rodney?
Yeah.
Got 2.5 Rodneys and the hippos. Where are the hippos, Rodney?
2.5 terms of being president. He was awarded South African Institute of Architects Medal of Distinction, elected in the Africa Union of Architects. He also served in the UIA Education Committee and also received a special mention of UIA Vasilis Goutas Prize. I was having a chat with the Vasilis Goutas, our friend Rodney and Nina, during the weekend. He actually wanted to join the call, Rodney, but he actually couldn't. Without further ado, Rodney, over to you.
Okay, can we have the first slide, Kim? Okay, Njelipi, which is the way. Now, I'm starting with the Portuguese chart from before the time of Riebeck, and it's kept secret from the British because they had the monopoly on the route to India. And you can see towards the south, Terra Natal, which is Natal, and the Baía de Pescario. Pescario implies fish, and that's because Durban was the largest wetland system in the whole east coast of Africa, all the way from the present mangrove swamps around to Sipingo, with about 6 or 7 rivers running into it. Of course, now we've drained that and built canals and flattened it all out. We've put our main stadia and parts of our CBD and all of our industrial area in that drained land. But it's quite important to look back at history, because in 1846, the Mgani River rose 7 meters. It was so deep, it was a raging torrent running down the present Brick Hill Road to its original mouth in the harbour. And for months afterwards, the harbour was full of putrefying people, animals, cattle, dead wildlife. And if this happened, we think we had a rough time in April. We see nothing compared to what could come. But if you go north from there, you'll see Lake St. Lucia, which has already been named, the mouth of the Umfolozi, and then Nyaka Island. Just to the left of Nyaka Island is the Rio de Tembe, and those people are still there today. So this was in the 15th century. So you can see how long the people I'm going to show you have been there. The caravels would go quite close to the coast. So the present sand dunes, which are depicted as a mountain range here, are apparently the highest in the world. And that's why they're depicted as mountains. Can we have the next slide, Kim? Maputo land stretches from the present Mozambican border to the north. On the left-hand side, it's defined by the Lubombo Mountains, which are actually alleged to be the first mountain range on Earth. And if you follow them north, they go through the Great African Rift Valley, through Ethiopia, all the way to Jordan, in fact, up the Dead Sea. So it's a huge, big trauma in the Earth's surface. The other side is the Indian Ocean, and it goes right down to Shishlui at the bottom. Now, in colonial or in prehistoric times, the chief Maputo had an influence all the way down to Shishlui, but during the Difakane, Shaka drove him up in about 1830 to the present Mozambique border. But I'm going to start by recounting a trip I did in about 1958 as a schoolboy, when I just freshly graduated from national service. We acquired a Jeep and we went up the north coast in the days when you went through the main streets of all the towns and across one-way steel bridges till we got to Mkuzi, halfway up that little map. Then we turned over the Lubombo Mountains and tried to get to the sea and quickly realized the sand dunes were in fact too big, and then got onto the North Road, which runs all the way up to what was then Lorenzo Marx. On the way back, we came via Nduma, which is right up at the top, and you couldn't get back across the Pongola River, so you had to cross the Lubombo Mountains into Eswatini and then come back along that route there. Next slide, Kim. Now, the area has recently uplifted coastline, so it's very low lying, and it's actually, it's still saline because it was underneath the sea 10,000 years ago. And it's characterized by these fever trees, or kurusboom, as they were called, because the pioneers actually believed that you got malaria from the trees. The Zulu word for them is much more descriptive, mkanyamkudi, which means it shines from afar. And that's the actual name of that whole area now. These trees are very rich. You could see the resin you can see on the right-hand side is full of resin, insects, resin dripping out of the twigs, and even wild animals nibble at the bottom like porcupines. And they're used for traditional medicines extensively, including erectile dysfunction. The first time they were used out of their context was actually the crescent-shaped approach to Ulundi Airport. A while later, the airport manager came to me and said, I don't know what's wrong, but the people are ring barking the trees and they're dying from the bottom. So I thought of a plan to solve this, and we put a notice on the two bottom trees from both sides. Please don't urinate on these trees. People use them for medicine, and the trees are still there. But nowadays you get them all over in Durban, and in fact I've even seen them in Cape Town. So they've been taken out of their habitat. Next slide, please. Next one. Kim, are you awake? Now I don't have any pictures of buildings, very few, because nearly 2 years ago our house got a direct hit from lightning on New Year's Day. And all our records were destroyed. Every electrical appliance was smashed. So we're starting day over. So I'm going to use sketches I did at the time and also very old photographs, if you'll excuse the quality. Next one. Now there I am as a young buck, freshly graduated from the National Service. I came on the trip as the mechanic, since I've been working on 2,000 horsepower crash boat motors. So the motor of a Jeep was just like a generator. But I started life as a cheesemaker. At 16 Rand a month, I could see not much prospects. So during my national service, I did a cartooning course, correspondence course. Next one. And
Rodney, what year was that?
1959, beginning.
59, okay.
So this is one of the tutorial entries. Just next one, please. That's a sort of drawing, that's a tutorial. It just shows how crowded we were inside this Jeep. Next one. Next slide. Kim. And this is the typical melodrama of a budding cartoonist. As we got to the beach, we couldn't get to the beach because of the high sand dunes, and we really thought we were going to die of sunstroke, but trying to push the car out. Next one. But we eventually got back onto the Great North Road, and this is the same alignment that goes all the way to Maputo today. But then it was just a little track through the bush. Next one. The first town we came to was Mbazwan, which is currently a huge big town. A literal translation would be Axville, if you were to translate Mbaza as an axe. And you'll notice that it was just bartering there, and hardly any men, only old people and women. That's because the only employment was on the mines, and all the men would go up to the mines. So it was a sort of absentee society. Next one. Because of malaria, which was endemic, and even tsetse flies, the population was very thinly spread. On the right-hand side, you'll see the sleeping hut, and on the left, the cooking hut. And if there was an enclosure, it was just tangled thorn bush with meager crops inside. Next one. On the left here, you get a Tembu woman. She makes wine from high palm trees, probably tipsy, a purveyor of liquor. And on the right, you see quite an interesting picture, because this man is no longer Mampara. He's been to the mines. And you can see his accordion on the ground next to him, walking great distances with his stick. He's courting in his car tire sandals. And just to really show the impact of the mines in those early days. About the majority of my adverts on our school notice board when we matriculated were for mining jobs. At any one time, there were 250,000 people underneath Joburg. And of course, the only way they could all communicate was Fanagalo. We used to sing songs in Fanagalo at school. Everyone could speak it. And the year after that, I went up to the Copper Belt and worked for a demolisher. And in fact, the only way I could speak to the men on site was by speaking in Fanagalo. Next one. Next one. We came to the border, which was only marked with a sign, which the arrow one way said Zululandia, and the other way said PEA, Portuguese East Africa. Next one. And suddenly, through the bushes, an Askari came running up, frantically putting on his fez and doing up his leggings. And because we couldn't stop because of the deep sand, he leapt onto the bonnet with a smile on his face. And when we got to the first town, which was the Tundu, we asked what the hell his story was. And as you may know, Portugal was neutral during the Second World War. So German U-boats used to refuel at Punta de Ora. And I hope that's not my battery.
I think it's Kim's battery.
Eh? Can't be my battery.
Kim, is still there? Yeah, cool. Plugged.
Okay. And people had stationed him at the border, the Union Defence Force, and given him a black book and said he had to record the details of every car that came over the border. We were the first car for 18 months, and everyone thought it was quite a joke because nobody had given him the decency to tell him the World War had ended 13 years before. He was still doing his job. Next one. This is the home of a Portuguese official. You can see immediately the change, the open werf to keep snakes away, the painting of the bottom of all poles and trees white to deter termites. Next one. And eventually we came to Lorenzo Marx. Now, the clear signs of almost 500 years of colonialism were there, all the Portuguese heroes, the Catholic Church. Next one. And it was quite an education. We didn't know then, of course, that Gustav Eiffel had done the railway station, and there was a budding young architect called Pancho Guedes in the area. Next slide. And the social habits took some getting used to. For example, drinking very rich coffee and swilling your mouth out with water and spitting it on the pavement at the bottom. Next one. However, we found where the Africans were living at a place called Chipanamini far more interesting. You'll notice the buildings here are the same as those early ones I showed. They're made of reeds in frames, although the houses are more modern looking. The car certainly isn't modern looking, but this is now the Citado de Canico. It's now, of course, a Citado de Cemento. I mean, it's solid concrete blocks nowadays. Next one. Coming back, we came along the northern border of South Africa, and there was no road at all, no bridges, and this road was put in very smartly in about 1975 when insurgents started coming across this border. And it was put in as a strategic road, which it still is, and there's a huge army camp now built at Ndumu. Next slide. This is the Pongala River. You can see how big it is. And there was a pond we got manually pulled across. And often there's now a magnificent bridge, long bridge over this area. And I often wonder if the people on the far side wonder why the town is called Emapondweni, because not many people can remember it. Next slide. We wanted to go to the bird park at Ndumu, but our Jeep stalled in the Ingwavuma River, and a Catholic father came to pull us out in his Land Rover. I noticed he had a rifle across the front of his dashboard, and he took us to his church. Ndumu was a small Catholic settlement. It was a church and a few classrooms and a clinic with nuns in it, and a police camp, and that's about all. The church was very innovative because he lived in the one end of the building, and there was this big space in the middle with all the desks facing one way where there was a blackboard, and on Sundays I'd turn them around the other way and there was the Virgin Mary. Very innovative. Little did I know then that I'd spent 30 years of my life building almost 100 buildings, separate buildings in that area. Next one. Now, I didn't come back for 30 years. By then, the dam had been built over the Pongala River, so one had easy access from the top. And the village on top there was an army camp, and you had to get permission to come across this bridge because it was controlled by the military. We'd been commissioned by a university organization called CORD, which stood for Community Organization Research and Development. So it was obviously a thinly disguised ANC initiative to empower the local people. So we're dealt with great suspicion. Next one. But we had great fun on that project because they had endless funds. For example, we built a huge sewing workshop with solar-powered sewing machines in it. And in this case, next to the Pongala River, we made a large earth dam, lined the wall, pumped it full of water, put fish in it, and then experimented with aquaculture and put chickens in A-frames on top, where the fish were thriving from the chicken droppings and the water was nutrient rich, and people couldn't steal the chickens. But once a year, they would breach the wall and flood the surrounding fields with this nutrient-rich effluent, and then go in and club all the fish to death and dry the fish out and have their protein for the next year. Next one. In the process of this moving around in the core days, suddenly what were homogenized Zulus before that we could only speak to in Whanakalo became them Gomazulus, the Nyaos, the Mtenjwas, the Bonchans, and I started getting a feel for the area. Education was in total disarray then. This is a former missionary school, and you can see the children underneath the trees learning. It always strikes me how beautifully turned out they are in white shirts, even in this open-air school. And years later, Richard Dobson and I were doing a water proximity survey in an informal area. And one of the questions was, how do you do your laundry? Meaning, do you walk 30 meters to a stream, or have you got a tap in the yard, or where is it? And 70% of the people said Omo, which shows how used they were to market surveys. Next one. Now, as we got recognized as architects in the area, we started getting a lot of commissions. I'm just going to show you one of these, which was for the Institute of Natural Resources at the university, who wanted to build a community center for development at Mbazwan. So we conceived this as a pole structure with a large internal space, which was ventilated through the top. And on the one side is a large space, which was for classrooms or offices on the other side. And the earth, it was just brought out level sand, so it was no problem. Next slide. Next, go back one. You can see the space on the right is enclosed. It was used, for example, as a church on a Sunday. And the slide on the space on the left is open at the back, and that is for building demonstrations and agriculture and the rest. It's separated in the middle with a kitchen, and above the kitchen is a caretaker who can look through both sides to protect it at night. Notice that the offices have all got little storerooms leading to them so that you could have a number of clubs using the same space. So there was the soccer club, or even a philosophy club once, a wildlife club. This is what one would call a loose fit building. Now there are 11 modules, so we had to make 12 frames, and we made it so that we could peg it and mark those 11 modules of pegs, and then fall down and tell the community that whenever they strung a line between two pegs and they crossed over, next slide, they must dig a 1 meter, they must dig a hole exactly as deep as the handle of a spade. Joanne Lees worked for me at that stage, and this is the drawing she did of the frame. And we made the first one as a sample and said, make the next 12 and then give us a shot, and we'll come up one morning early and make sure that at least 30 people on site, and we'll pull it up. Next one. We left at 4 in the morning, twitching with excitement, the holes were ready, and arrived on site, and there was about 6 people struggling with the trusses, and next door was a huge big round robin soccer match with an audience of about 100. And I was totally flabbergasted. I didn't know what to do because we just didn't have the labor to do it. But an old wise man told me what to do. And we went to the local butcher shop, which was really just a roadkill cow hanging in a tree, and bought 2 large pieces of steak and went upwind of the soccer match and started the braai, and the smoke went over the soccer field, and that was the end of the round robin. And the whole building was pulled up in one day. It was braced and pulled up. And concrete foundations were put in. Then a week later, a lorry arrived from Johannesburg with a pre-formed steel. And so now next slide. So now they had a shelter to work under from the blazing heat. And it took another 18 months to finish the building. But they could work in the coolness underneath. This is one of the few buildings we've done that's made the pages of the Architecture Review. Next slide. Now, in the meantime, the road to Maputo had hardened up and was called the Spatial Corridor Road, and you could see houses densely packed on both sides. On the left here, you can see the Nkukwan, and in the middle is the Indlu Round, which is around Darvel, and then on the other extreme right, Fokono. But the thing to note is how now the sites are defined with high concrete walls, so people could now express their own territory. Next slide. Many of them were just built many rooms to cope for itinerant laborers, school teachers who wanted to be able to go to Richards Bay or Lundi over the weekends and taught in the local area. So they were catered for. Next one. And some were even large buildings like, I think this was a traditional healers settlement. A lot of the money that went into this housing was actually remittances from the mines for housing from places like Marikana, where they continued to live in shacks. Next one. And some of them were rather awful, like the sort of houses we get in Westville. The upper floor has got too many windows for surveillance, so it has to have an air conditioner. The steep staircase doesn't comply with the national building regulations. Because there's obviously wealth there, there has to be a security guard. The lady of the house is sitting on the pavement trying to earn hard-earned cash. And sadly, the Lala palms, which used to supply wine and were about 8 meters high, are now cut when they're very young and put in sacks. And those are all the brooms for the yards in Gauteng and KZN. Next one. Now, in 1991, a Jewish lady from Durban, Nora Tager, went to look at the bird park with her husband, and they were very impressed by the young guide that came with them, and asked them to take them back so they could see his school, because he spoke such good English. And they were shocked to find just below the Catholic Church 3 classrooms and literally hundreds of children under the trees. And she was totally shocked by this and came to our office and said to us, if we were prepared to measure the school up and make a development plan, she would raise the money. And luckily we accepted that challenge and got 30 years of work out of it. It was the first thing we did when we started working there was to do a skills audit to see what skills there were in the area, and found that there were lots of people who had elementary skills. And then we set up a block yard and showed the women how to make blocks, and they got paid per block. And then the local block layers would lay them to build the classrooms, and they were paid, I think, R2.25 for each block. So everybody was paid for their output, which is very important. We built 16 classrooms eventually, and the trusses, for example, were just local timber, but nailed up trusses. And it was a wonderful experience to work in a traditional area. It made me think about resolving all sorts of political things. It's a big contrast to our market-driven society. There was a shortage of men, admittedly, but we would have to go to the traditional court and make a case to have some land. Then the headman would pace it out, and we'd also support the locals. We suddenly realized how important it was to greet everyone in a room or at a meeting, for example. So it was a learning curve for me. And I was lecturing at the time, and I was working with George Norville, QS. So we would have to come up every second Saturday. It was a 16-hour drive there and back, and pay the people for work done and to make sure that the materials are ready. But he could see this idea of only paying people for work that is done. On one occasion, I had to stay overnight. I was with an environmentalist doing an environmental survey, and we inquired if local places we could spend the night there, and they said no. They were referred to them, and of course had a wonderful meal of a stew, and then afterwards we were shown the bedroom. I wanted to ask to see the bedroom, and I was horrified when they opened the door to see a double bed, a single double bed. And I can still remember the look of impending fear in this face of this bearded environmentalist who got into bed first as the smooth-cheeked architect slid between the nylon sheets between next to him. Next one. But we learned all about things like, you know, when you sit around a basin of warm water in the morning in the living area with school kids stepping over you, you start realizing about things about privacy. And eventually built this whole community center. You see there's a traditional tree in the middle. On the left, there's a large hall, two classrooms on the, a large hall on the right, two classrooms on the left, and in the back there's toilets, there's kitchen. There was a place for the meeting room for the chief, caretaker who would live inside, and in the front there's a commercial frontage. One of the things there was the telecenter sponsored by the Dutch government, and on the left-hand side was a whole bakery set up with equipment, training, with a standby generator and everything. Then rather foolishly, this was handed over to the community, and that was mistake number one. I had a similar experience about 45 years ago of building an early childhood center for Harry Oppenheimer's wife up in Nanda. And there's one thing she insisted on every year was a balance sheet. And in the end of the first year for the AGM, I had to go and fetch her accountant from the airport and take him to the AGM. And when I drove him back, I said, I wasn't very happy with that balance sheet. It was written up in pencil. And he said, don't worry, soon it'll be in ball pen, and then it'll be in typewriters. Now, that 45 years later, that institution is still producing a balance sheet, and funders are falling over themselves to lend them money because they've got such a good track record. It's almost trebled in size. It's got craft center now, it's got vegetable gardens and so on. But here, this was misappropriated because Minister Nzimande put a computer school in the hall shortly afterwards, paid very good rent for that, which got misappropriated. Nothing was put back into maintenance. The gutters fell off. So the clay, it was on an unstable site. The building started heaving, it started cracking. And if you go there now, there's just the remnants of a carcass of a standby generator, and all the rooms are just occupied with people who are just letting rooms. There's an awful school in the two classrooms, and the hall is painted black inside and just left full of computer desks. So the community haven't managed it all. Next slide. Next one. Nearby, because of the shortage of accommodation for teachers, we built teachers' accommodation with a common room, flats for married teachers, other accommodation for single ones, and a big kitchen. But they had to draw their water from a well which is 4 meters deep. So you can see this idea of the tower with a water tank on top and a solar pump pumping that full. And then halfway down you can see there's a solar water heater. So at the bottom there's a sink, They had solar lighting, had warm water, and endless amount of water to use for washing. About 2 weeks later, the panel was stolen, and the funder refused to replace it. He said, no, it's a community job. They must know where it is, and it's up to them. Now, it's very sad to go back there 25 years later and find the building now still with an empty tank on top, people drawing water from the well, and someone has appropriated the building and let it out to Eskom staff, so it's not even serving its purpose. So this community buildings, that there has to be some built-in responsibility. Next one. And Duma at that time had a higher than 40% HIV infection rate. It was the highest in the country. And on top of that, 16% of the people had drug-resistant TB. And we did a survey of the schools. There were 55 destitute orphans in the schools, and 4% of the children had to walk more than an hour every day to get to school. So girls just weren't coming because it was too dangerous. So together, there were little huts being built in the back of local homesteads by the Catholic Bishops Fund, but we wanted to get the children together to give them life skills, and conceived this idea with the community, made huge models, and everybody was very enthusiastic. You can see in the middle the communal area, and traditionally boys on the right, girls on the left. They have to go past a matron's quarters where all the ablution facilities are, and there's eating area off that crawl as well. And the children would do the cooking themselves. They'd be taught to cook. Workshops at the back, and the entrance off the road was past the headmaster's house and from his office. The construction was very interesting. The walls were built of weld mesh with the reeds woven to the outside of them, and the inside there was shade cloth to stop mosquitoes coming in, and the shutters were merely just shade cloth on Velcro, which I'd seen in India before. So it was a real low-cost building. It only had a staff of a headmaster, 2 matrons, a dietitian, and a few cleaners. You'll see it was involved vegetable gardens for boys and girls, and was surrounded by fruit trees. Now, around about this time, next slide, in 1999, the ANC became into power in that area, and Premier Mkhize conceived the idea of the Nkululeko Development Project, and right on the edge of Natal, KZN, and since we had a reputation in the area, he appointed us as lead designers, but with a whole plethora of something like 9 different engineers. And suddenly what was a simple learner's shelter turned into 32 separate cottages, each with a house parent, central stores. You can see it's integrated into the local schools and the community centers across the road, and there was going to be a library. And unfortunately, this whole thing, everybody was under the lead or principal agent rather, was what I could only call a project damager. There's nothing as useful as a good project manager, but a project damager is hell-bent. And they were represented by a D. Frock town planner who immediately started usurping us and caused a lot of tension. Next one. Next slide. Because there was no plan for the town, and the nearest road, Tar Road, was 23 kilometers away, it was a huge program. It involved bringing in roads. There was no water, putting up, fixing up all the schools. We had to fix up 3 schools, the clinics, building new clinics, and eventually the climax was to be a new model high school. So we conceived this idea of swinging the entrance road around the outside of the settlement to define the outside, and the existing main road, which ran through the middle, was to be pedestrianised and was to try and link the rather linear town up, and was to be lined with fruit trees. So it became a pedestrian way. And you could see we've also worked out where trunk sewers could go so that more intensive development could take place, and the sewerage could actually go down beyond the main road. And in fact, we were proposing to even use it to extract methane. Next one. Now, the first task was to fix up 3 local schools. One of them was the one we'd previously built at St. Philip's. So we had to take off the roofs because they were asbestos, and it was the accommodation was extended extensively. It was made a fully accessible school. It had the learners trained, more toilets built in, but we tried to personalize the schools by getting the pupils involved with artworks showing interest and importance of education. Next one. We were instructed to put chessboards on each school campus, which we did, but we also put malabalaba boards, because this game I've seen played right up to Swahili, by Mombasa. And if you go there today, a set of chessboards costs 8,000 Rand, but malabalaba you can play with bits of glass and bottles and tins, and it's used extensively. But many of the schools had Japanese toilets, which were a gift from the people of Japan, built by a contractor from Richards Bay, and just put up. The Japanese had never heard of termites, for example, so you could stand in the back of the classrooms and hear the termites literally eating the books. But the toilets were a total mess because they were endorsed strictly 6 monthly inspections, and we were the first people to visit them after 11 years. So it was just a sea of feces and urine, and everybody was using the space around them. So we immediately pulled the urinal out into a big curve, because sun is really good for hygiene, and men like urinating against walls anyway. And the actual toilets, the doors had all been stolen by local people for their cottages. So we defaced them by putting big holes in them. And the other thing we had to do was raise the transom of all the doors, because Japanese toilets hit tall South Africans in the middle of the forehead. But this gave us a good idea, because when you're looking inside, you can't see in, because when you're outside, you can't see in because it's dark inside. But when you're inside, you think that everybody can see you. So as people would say in Tonga, they wouldn't make rudeness in the toilets. You can see the classic mistake here of over specifying ironmongery instead of just using local stuff. Next slide, please. Now, the clinics, we had to build a new mother-to-child infection clinic and one for teenage pregnancies. And we were told to make it educational. So we made the children sit in their room looking outwards onto a mural with their backs towards the doctors. And this was my briefing to the mural artist who from Durban on what mural we wanted, what to do. And he went up to site, we showed him what he must do, got the paint, and suddenly the project manager phoned us and said, stop all work. The sister says we must stop all work. So we drove up to Ndumu to find out what was wrong, and the sister said, no, we want Chabula, everybody must be happy. But the artist said, but my brother's on crutches, he's not happy at all. He said, no, everybody must be happy, they must all be wearing shoes, and they must all be natural, as natural as possible. Next slide. So if you go back to there now, there's this rather painful, stiff mural, and they've decided they'd much rather have the children looking at the doctor's doors than the mural. So they've had to put in a chair rail, which hides 50% of the murals. So that is rather disappointing. Next slide. Now, when we built the library, Ndumu is built on an A-grade paleontological site. This is stuff just literally lifted out of the foundations. You can see animates, mussels, coral, all sorts of little nascent marine animals, which really demonstrate that it was underwater as recently as 10,000 years ago. Next slide. And on top of the Lubombo Mountains is Border Cave. This is a wonderful place to go to. You can see it's a deep cave. Here the view is inland towards the Manzini, looks into Eswatini, right on the top. And it's got evidence of 200,000 years of hominoid existence. I'm saying hominoid because obviously man only became cognitive about 30,000 years ago. And this is proven because they found a jar in the back of the cave with a child's body in it, together with beads. And that proves the beginning of a concept of afterlife, a very important discovery. And even more important is what's the oldest known mathematical instrument in the world, which is 8,000 years old. It's a baboon's femur with 28 markings on it, which depict the menstrual cycle or the tides or whatever. And it's just was a wonderful opportunity, I thought, to be building a high school and a library 26 kilometers away.
Rodney,
Yeah.
sorry, just to disturb there. Are there archaeological sites around this area? It looks quite interesting.
There's a museum there. Debbie Whelan designed it at Border Cave. Yeah.
Ah, okay, cool.
But the cave is protected. I mean, it's a very, very important cave.
Mm. Okay,
But,
sure.
Next slide. So when we did the library, built the library, I conceived this idea for a mural, which on the top left you can see early man sort of a language and a woman looking at horror at the stick. Now I've done subsequent research and found that the San people use the same kind of stick with 28 markings to predict pregnancy, because for San people it is a disaster to have a child within 3 years because they had to carry their children everywhere. In fact, they used to commit infanticide. So the woman's looking at horror at this, what was called the magic wand, while the man makes a proposal. The next mural was a little town was going to be some sand paintings, and then hieroglyphics, then the importance of the Rosetta Stone, panel 4, which interpreted that, and then at the bottom left, the monastic tradition of laboriously copying down script, and then number 6, the importance of the Gutenberg press, typeface, oil-based inks, and being able to reproduce manuscripts. And then, of course, the modern press, which just churns out newspapers. And on number 8, a smiling learner at the Ndumu Library, where they're typing away and talking over the air, and it's a paperless society. Strangely enough, Library Services said this was too intellectual, and we weren't going to go ahead on it. Next one. Okay. But we did do some interesting things there. For example, this is the hot west wall of the library, and made this out of rammed earth, 400 millimeters thick, so it performs extremely well. We cast fiber cement pipes into it with portholes at each end. These are for display of local crafts, and you can see the different layers of earth quite distinctly. Women and children did a lot of the ramming, and I was quite proud of this because, of course, it doesn't exist in the National Building Regulations. The fact that a huge majority of, or a percentage of people in South Africa live in earth just doesn't doesn't exist. Next one. Next slide. And we try to celebrate local fauna. For example, this is a huge animite. It's like a giant snail, stands about 1.5 meters high and would go along the bottom of the seabed, gobbling up rubbish. And to try and make, and I've got many of those shells at home now. So it was a massive creature. Imagine that thing coming to you along, but it's 160 million years old. On the right-hand side is a detail for the burglar bars of the windows, which is a dung beetle, because dung beetles are extremely important. They're the strongest animals on Earth for their size. They, of course, get dung and bury it and get fertility into the soil. They spread seeds. They get rid of dung and flies. And they've also been proven that they steer their balls of dung using the Milky Way. In fact, we wanted to use this as on the badge of the high school, but that's another story. Next slide, please. Now, when you get work in Maputoland from Public Works, they don't forewarn you about the hazards of the area, like Angolan short-tailed bats. These can get through a hole as big as a 20-cent piece through sheets of asbestos, and the roofs are collapsing with this guano. Extremely, I mean, there were so many in the roofs of the clinic. They were putting rats, and there were snakes in the clinic as well. But to get rid of them is dead simple. We called in the bat interest group, and yet that information isn't passed on. Next slide. Snakes, mambas, cobras. On one day under the site, just before a site meeting, the elevated container, they found a 4.5 meter python. By the time we got to the site meeting, it had been sold for 200 rand and skinned. And the young foreman was a Hindu, and he went home that weekend and never came back. The virulent termites, you can see they're even coming up out of the ground while the building is under construction, looking for timber. And this is so simple to solve too, because termites have to have clay in the soil. That's what an old Zulu advised me. As I say, you've got to listen so carefully you even hear what people don't say, because they can't go in the sunshine. They have to protect themselves. And the builder in this case, against the specifications, had leveled the site with soil from next to the Ingwavuma River, which had clay in it. Next slide. So that's how to solve it. The inclement weather, cyclonic winds, because it's near the Tropic of Capricorn. This is a builder with all his expensive sheeting, which we had to use interlocking sheeting to stop the bats. And that's after a windstorm, what he could recover. The site hut was disappeared altogether. Containers were blown over, and you could see Jojo tanks bouncing across the countryside. And we'd have 160 millimeters rain in about 2 hours. Next slide. Now, when the tender to formalize the town planning went out, Coxter gave it to some nameless technician. And whereas we'd put the road around the outside, now suddenly the main road at the bottom here, I mean, the former road became the main road for the first time in about 100 years. A huge army trucks were trundling through town right past all these schools for the Department of Social Development. Our entrance road originally was on the left here, so you can see the courtyard of all these buildings is off that, where pensioners would come to draw money, and there were old people's places, youth development centre, early childhood, and the library at the bottom. Now suddenly the road is coming in next to it, so we had to flip the whole building around. So this flip-flipping was a great frustration. And of course the elevated roads formed the perfect dam wall. There were inadequate openings under the road, So whenever we had really heavy rain, the water would pile up here and flow down through the library and through the whole scheme. Next one. Next one. Now, these are the staff that worked with me. See Glenn Scott, the late Dean Cesari, Dylan Feldman, there was Ron Steenkamp and Mark Leith as well. And I must say, we had to work extremely hard to keep up with this rushed program. The documentation for the high school was reduced by 40%, and we had to rush through it. At one stage, the office went up to 9 people, but this is the core staff that were supervising it towards the end. At this stage, too, it just became too much for me. We were working 16, I was working 16 hours a day, and I had a massive stroke. And I wouldn't want anybody to go through that. I mean, it's very humiliating to sit on the edge of a bed and have a physiotherapist tell you how to put on a pair of trousers again. But I never want to see a Sudoku game again. And they got me going by making me read an hour every day in English and half an hour in Afrikaans or Zulu for a whole month. And that sorted my brain out. Next one, please. Next slide. Now, I took critique of the Extended Public Works Program. You see there are 9 people here. 3 are chatting, 3 are working, and 3 are watching. I call it the Extended Public Watching Program. Now, they were paid, admittedly they paid, and it brings money into the area, only paid 50%, 55% of the national minimum wage. And they just paid to be there. They're not paid for it. It's not plus-based work. They should be paid to get trenches, deep as they need, so many rand a meter, and then you will see the work really firing ahead. So I think this is, we're going about it the wrong way. Next one. Now, the Cape-Town-based company got the contract with some local partners. They cleared the site and they immediately pre-ordered 4.5 million bricks. So the whole site got covered in bricks. Next slide. And it was a 15-month project to build the whole school. Now, the first 3 months was wasted with waiting for Eskom to move a power line. And we all know what happens when you move backwards and forwards, the pallets break, and it just became a disgusting mess. Next one. Now, I'm just going to talk about the high school quickly. It was built on the site, which we didn't select, on a hilltop site, mainly because the minister chose it, it was prominent, and 1/3 of the site is totally unbuildable. So the road inwards, the parking, like all cases like this, becomes a tail that wags the dog. There are 40 classrooms, 1,600 pupils, and 200 boarders. So the road in and the parking at the back takes the best contour. So the school is actually designed on a slope analysis. The classrooms are all gathered around the former hilltop. At the bottom is the library, which is the sort of visual climax of the whole thing. And the dormitories are draped singly along the hills to try and fit in with the contours. And with different colored roofs, give them some individuality. The same with the staff houses right at the top. And the common room and the matron's facilities are the white roofs. The residential units have all got pyramidal roofs. You see the workshops have got double-story workshops have got sawtooth roofs. The arena in the middle there, that big building, has got a barrel vault, the dining hall behind that. Now, it was very frustrating because there's an 8-meter difference between the top and the bottommost accommodation, and it had to have universal access. If you look carefully, you'll see the whole site is a labyrinth of ramps. which had to be covered. Very challenging. And in front of the two lots of common rooms is a little circular terrace, which is a sort of a sheet where they could have a nyama. And now we were told to be innovative and to save energy and water. For these pupils to wash every morning, 200 pupils, they would use 25 kiloliters of water, but 1,600 kids would need 22 kiloliters of water to flush toilets. We conceived the idea of a tank at the bottom end of the site and pumping water up for flushing all the toilets. But this was overruled by the mechanical engineers for some safety reasons. I contend that anybody who drinks water out of a toilet needs to die anyway or get very sick. You'll see that there was no space for a classroom, so they agreed on a swimming pool halfway down, a quarter Olympic swimming pool. Now we got advice here, and the deep end is 1.4 meters and the shallow 1.3, because the Lifesavers Association told us you can't drown in that amount of water, but you can do a tumble turn. And then one day we got a phone call from the project damager to say stop all work. They've interviewed a prospective headmaster who's currently at Westville High School, and he's interested in the job, but he wants to have a pool 1.1 meters deep and twice the size, because he wants to get Chad to come here and do a demonstration swim. So I wrote to them and I said, give me a letter on your letterhead with your address, giving an undertaking that you take all responsibility as soon as somebody drowns. I've never received that letter, and so this has gone ahead as planned. But we had a very frustrating time with we had staff from, consultant staff from Nigeria, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, very few locals, in fact, ironically. The builders established a whole village on the site below, and a batching plant brought everything in. But next slide, please. Next slide. But this is another demonstration of the frustration. I spent 9 years of my life in large dormitories and knew how important privacy was. And Roz and Glenn went to 5 schools, boarding schools, and did a detailed survey and found not a single lock with a door that wasn't broken, or dormitory that without broken lockers. So they conceived this idea of an Nduna bed with a cage underneath it. You could see the contents, but everything could be taken there and safely stored, and with only hanging space in the middle for blazers, so stuff that had to hang. Beds are all separated by a 1.4 meter low wall, so that when you lie down, you've got total privacy, you've got your own workspace, your own pinning space, your own points and everything. And when we handed this over, the school with divan beds which were solid underneath, in spite of us actually delivering the sample to the site, and had this humiliating, or I said this humiliating experience by the short director of infrastructure coming to and saying, look, you people know nothing about planning, you haven't got lockers. Next slide. Next slide. Now, I knew from previous experience that the space between standard classrooms is the most important space at all. So we can see this idea of the which is a traditional beehive hut. And it was half an one with a stage in the middle, seating around the outside, and the Izintingu are represented by steel pipes. And the idea is that a steel pipe alone doesn't have much strength, but when it's interwoven, it becomes a basket and has tremendous strength. And this really was a representation of the idea of Ubuntu. how, everyone has to stand together. We went to a great deal of trouble with the landscaping. It's all indigenous. There are Lubombo, aloes, tree ferns, most of it from all the roadworks. The hill was reconstructed. The highest point is a euphorbia tree like the Zulu Kings have at Marikana, so it had an educational purpose. And there were even 34 stones at the base of that to bring it right up to date with what happened in 2014. On the right-hand side, you can see a pergola where they could get a contrast of being in deep shade. And that was covered with raffia palm leaves, which are the longest leaves in the world, 6 meters long. And they're interesting because they are only indigenous from Mtunzini to Inhambane, Mozambique, but you get them in Madagascar and Western Australia, which shows they must have been around for 200 million years. There are no watering points at all here, and the classrooms are built down into the slope. And that's the arena beyond. Next slide, please. Now, my final slide is the reality of what's happening now. I think we need to all stand together. A sports field built by the local authority out of virgin bush, and on the right, a firm of architects have put in social housing about 6 years too late, because all the locals now have subsequently built little rentable units in the yards, and there's been no uptake. But there's not a single tree. Our Deputy Minister of Public Works spoke about the importance of carbon sequestration. You can just see now how much damage can be caused by architects. The top of the sports field there are gym instruments. And imagine if there was just a huge big ficus tree there, so they could do the exercises in the shade like we can do in Bulwer Park in Durban. So I really think that we need to get together and decolonize the approach and go for a more community-based approach than this bureaucratic approach of giving it. Also, while this was going on, I mean, theft became endemic on all the sites, whereas before the community owned the buildings, so there wasn't a theft problem at all. Next slide. That's all, actually. Right. Can the Inquisition start now?
Thank you so much, Rodney. I like your last comment on the community approach. The work at Mbazwane Resource Center with people carrying trusses, reminiscent of what Francis Carey does in most of his work. I'm glad that was published. I think the process of realizing that in most of your projects has been really amazing. Well, it's good to see you in good health, Rodney. It's a pity you couldn't deliver your lecture in Zulu in this KZN Institute of Architects, because most people don't speak Zulu. But it's good to see you in good health, and it's good to hear from you. So today was about celebrating your journey, Rodney, and what you've contributed so much in the industry. So thank you so much for the lecture. Colleagues, I'll open the floor for any comments or questions.
Clear as mud. That's great.
Yeah.
Rodney, tell me, you've done a huge amount of work in this northeastern part of the province and the country. Why do you live in Durban?
Often wonder that. A site visit was just short of 1,000 kilometers. We put over 200,000 kilometers on one of the cars, not the Land Rover, and thank God we didn't have a single accident. But the worst part about my stroke 8 years ago is I could never drive again. So I was relying on other people to drive me. And this ended up by me having to live eventually in the workers' village on site, and suddenly discovered all the insecurities of, there were the people working there from a Vambo land, and going to Shabines at night with them, or going fishing. And I saw one man catch a crocodile once in his line, cut it very quickly. But any event, when I was prof, when I went to the village, when I came out at the end of the contract, it was I was called Kulu. But another thing we really need is like they have in the UK, where architects have to do a post-occupancy evaluation of work, because I've never been back to site. Your public works, it's finished, goodbye, you just go. And 40% of that site was set aside for farming on the express instructions of the Premier, and I doubt whether cabbage has even been put there. So, as you know, there's a huge crisis, I think, of sustainability.
Thanks, Rodney. Mike? Mike Poole? Floor is yours, sir.
Hi, Rodney. Quite an extraordinary talk. You had us all captured. No, hang on, I hate that word. Did me not use that word. You had us all enthralled. I just also want to just agree with you. The project damages, they are definitely the worst that can be. One day I'll talk to you about it. You know what reasonable ones are, but it's an amazing story, Rodney, and you've done quite great things. So please just keep on enriching our lives. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And Rodney, how much of practicing do you still do at the moment?
Sorry, I got battery operated ears. What is that?
I'm saying how much practicing do you still do? How much regular work do you still do?
Well,
at the moment, currently.
Certain people don't get work from public works anymore. I've been aiming mainly for Mozambique. I'm doing hopefully a little project at Punta de Oro. Kirkwhite and I entered a competition recently, but I also do quite a lot of work in places like Bombay, where most architects fear to tread. I'm extending a tavern at the moment, having great fun with that.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Yeah, no, I want to find out if still active, or you semi-retired or something. I know.
No, I can't retire. My grandfather worked till he was 87, so that's probably my target.
Ah, great.
I've got 5 years to go.
That's good. That's good. Any more questions, guys?
Can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Don here. Hello.
Yeah, Don. Yeah, I can go ahead, Don.
Rodney, it's Don here. You were a real pioneer, adventurer, and to see where you started from or where you've come to is a fantastic journey. I'm really, all of us are very impressed, particularly in terms of your motivation, culture, and architecture. May you have many more years. All the best to you, Rodney.
Thank you.
Kind words, Don. Thank you. Lindy.
Oh, hi, Rodney. I'm just wanted to say thank you so much for inspiring us again. I feel like I'm 21 years old sitting in one of your lectures. So I don't have any particular comments other than just to say thank you so much for inspiring. I would say everyone in the Zoom call across the profession, and yeah, keep doing your amazing work. You are such an inspiration, and it's a real honor to be here in the class with you and hearing you again today.
Well, Lindy, I really appreciate that call from Evansville. I mean, Australia.
What did you call it?
Evansville. Brisbane.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I haven't seen you for a long time.
you'll have to come and visit.
Yeah.
Any more comments? Any comments and questions? Good
Rodney, can I ask?
Yeah, Ken.
Thanks, Skura. Tell me, I've got a similar problem to you with maybe hearing, but tell me your Zulu magic system of dealing with termites. I missed it a bit. Tell me, what's the magic? How do we stop termites from climbing up the buildings? By natural means. No blooming mooties.
The only thing to do is to build on sand where there's no clay at all.
Just sand.
And
Okay.
the Zulus used to char, and so did Voortrekkers, char the end of timber before they put it into the ground. And that seems to work quite well. But there's nothing like good old poison.
Any particular trees we should look for? Okay, all right. Thanks, Rodney. Okay, there we go. Well done. Thank you very much for that. And there we go. Long may it continue. But really, you're quite right. Local participation is very important if the buildings are going to last and be looked after and loved. And it's just something that this country needs to learn, that there's got to be much more emphasis on self-help, self-construction, self-build, with guidance, of course, and with help. But thank you, Rodney.
But I think it's also M for management and maintenance. That's one of the challenges we have, and accountability, like Mary Oppenheimer taught me.
Yeah, but when people own the thing, that makes a huge difference.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Rodney. Thanks to people who are not regulars on this call, Lindy. Cape Town, I see Stefan Antoni. I see Ian Lowe. Prosper, now you are a regular from Namibia. Thank you so much for joining.
I even see Hans Squatter from Norway.
Yes, sir. Hans Scott.
Ryan
Welcome.
Neal in Ireland. We've got Ryan Neal.
Oh,
in
you are mute. You are mute, Hans. Please unmute.
I lost my voice, so I can't pass on anything sensible. But it was wonderful, even though I had to get up at 5:30 in the morning because you're 1 hour ahead of us. It was worth it.
Where are you, Hans? Where are you?
In Norway.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Thanks for joining in.
Because we not only Rodney isn't only famous in South Africa. We had him in here in the 90s. We invited him in to speak to colleagues in Norway. I believe it was in the 90s. And we've been following him ever since. It was Karen Smuts who notified me about Rodney speaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hans. Any other comment, question? I'm actually so glad there are no technical questions as such. It just shows that you are hosting someone who's been around, who is celebrated, who knows what they're talking about, whose contribution in architecture is more than just drawings and actual buildings. That's what it means when you don't have technical questions. It's beautiful. Everybody covered? Questions, comments? Everybody's fine.
I have a question, Skura.
Yes.
And it's not a technical question at all from the admin office, but just from somebody who's interacted with Rodney on a regular basis and just am such a respecter of him as a person outside of his impacts in architecture. Rodney, I want to know what inspired you or what motivated you after your stroke to recover? Because as I've met you, as quick-witted a man as I've ever met by any standard, you know, I can't speak to the history of your work, having never studied architecture or worked in the field before. But just as a human being, what inspired you to get from that point where you were 8 years ago to where you are now, where you can go through a 1.5-hour presentation without notes and just produce facts and figures and be on the mark with all your information without reference to a single, not a single note or a single reminder? How do you do it? How did you recover? What motivated you?
I think all credit must go to Roz and my family. I had a hell of a rehabilitation process, psychologists, physio, God knows what else, and really had a big workout. But when you have a stroke, you lose all confidence. I'm lucky that I lectured till I was 70, and just when I turned 70, I wondered what was going to happen, and then I got that big job. But I lost my hearing. It really was terrible. It took a lot of patience to help me.
Well, I commend you. Sorry, continue.
Well, having to survive as well, being an architect.
Yeah, no, I commend you, Rodney, because as I say, your memory and your mind and your facilities are intact, and having spent this time with you, it's just astonishing. You are a remarkable man. I take my hat off to you. I do indeed. Thank you.
Hi, Rodney, it's Ahmed here.
Hello,
I'd
Ahmed.
just like to thank you for your humaneness. I studied architecture in Natal purely because of what you did for me. I tried applying, it was height of apartheid, and obviously none of the black universities had offered architecture. I came to an interview with you and a prof who will remain unnamed. And fortunately for me, you saw some potential in me, and it was through you as a black person that I got the opportunity to study architecture. So once again, thank you, Rodney. Thank you for your humaneness.
Well, thank you very much for that, because I think the transformation of our institute is one of my pet things I'm going for, and with open architecture and stuff like that. But it's important. And now, in fact, I think it's so transformed that the white architects are probably the minority soon.
Thanks, Rodney. Thank you so much.
Certainly at the School of Architecture.
Yeah, certainly the School of Architecture. Yeah, definitely. Everybody happy? Everybody covered?
Two hands on the floor. Two hands on the floor, Skura. Lindsay.
Ivor, and then I'll go to Lindy again.
Hi, Rodney. Thank you for the talk you gave this morning. And I think what I got out of it was how much you enjoy making architecture a fun thing to be involved in, as well as being a serious endeavor. But thank you for your contribution and inspiration over the years. Thanks, Rod.
Thanks, Ivor. Lindy?
One final question from me, and I apologize, it's unsolicited, so you can choose not to answer it. But what can the rest of the world learn from African architecture in terms of indoor air quality and what we've just been through with the pandemic? What do you think are the key takeaways that the world can look to Africa to learn from in terms of passive ventilation and designing and creating healthy buildings? If it's too hard, say no.
No, I think it's already here. One has to recognize it. But we have a tremendous struggle because it's not recognized by our own authorities. I mean, for example, earth architecture. I've done 3 earth buildings, houses, but I've only built them for white millionaires. They're just not acceptable because it's something from the, it's a hell of a confused place. But things like natural ventilation, look at the way Africa has survived the pandemic compared to the rest of the world. I'll think about that and I'll write to you.
I'd love that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodney. Yeah, I think from my side, Rodney, thank you so much for what you've given us as the profession, especially through the institute. I think we started working closely around the UA 2014 when I was assisting you with be an architect for the day when we had high school students, exposing them to the profession, etc. So we really appreciate everything you've done for the profession. What are your parting shots? Rodney?
Sorry, what are you?
What will be your parting words?
Oh, cheers, everybody. Nice to see you all again. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. May everybody have a lovely weekend.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you, Rodney, for making the extraordinary out of the ordinary.
Hi, Rodney. Gerald speaking. Last time I saw you 8 years ago. I'm so happy you recovered. Yes, I'm 9 in living, but I'm currently visiting with Wally in Cape Town. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Rodney. Greatly appreciated from Cape Town.
Cheers, Rodney.
Bye.
Cheers, Rodney. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, Rodney. Bye-bye.
Cheers all. Bye.
Cheers, guys.